Hey everyone, it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen to the story. First zombie alert, NYC Train Station Outbreak. It all began in New York City on a Monday that looked like any other until the alert started breaking through the noise. I was at the Rail Control Center on West 54th Street. Florida ceiling screens showing the entire subway map pulsing in red and green when the first incident reports stacked up faster than we could clear them. My name is Daniel Vega, communications technician for New York City Transit. My job was usually to make radios behave, keep the handhelds talking to the repeaters, keep the tunnels talking to the surface, keep the dispatchers heard by the people with flashlights underground. It wasn't supposed to be a job that involved choosing who we could help and who we couldn't. It was just after 10 a.m., the kind of late summer humidity that makes the city smell like rain and hot metal. Coffee rings framed the dispatch console by my elbow. On one of the big panels, a red alarm tile flashed over the 6th line between 33rd Street and Grand Central. Unauthorized persons on tracks. That didn't grab anyone at first. People stepped onto tracks every week, but then another tile popped, another, and soon entire corridors lit up like a Christmas tree left too long on the wall. Passenger altercation. Train crew not responding. Approach with caution. Emergency egress, utilized alarm. Behind me, a supervisor muttered, "Something's wrong with the CAD timestamps." The computer-aided dispatch feed showed incident times out of sequence, as if the network hiccuped and spat everything out at once, but the radio told a different story. The channel sounded like a storm of overlapping voices, conductors shouting line and car numbers, the clipped cadence of transit bureau cops moving from one call to the next. Amid that, the sterile emergency alert tone cut through the room. We are pushed to every phone at once. Wireless emergency alerts, the kind you usually swat away when there's a flash flood. My phone buzzed until my fingertips vibrated. Citywide safety message. Unidentified public health threat. Shelter in place. Avoid crowds. Follow instructions from officials. On the big wall screen, the same message scrolled in fluorescent amber over every digital sign in the system. People are good at ignoring general announcements. They are less good at ignoring transit shutdown trains in the middle of the weekday. I took a handset off the charger and keyed into the maintenance simplex. RCC Tech 1 to radio shop units deployed. Check-in, shop 3 here. Miguel answered. He and I had been paired since my 2nd year. He was steady, the guy who could calm a furious conductor with a joke and a spare battery. I'm still at the MNR concourse. Signals clean on the 456. You seeing this mess by 14th? I've got alarms from Union Square through Canal, I said. Looks like exits getting popped. Patrol stretched. K9 in transit. My eyes landed on a pinched-looking cluster of events around the line and the 123. Too many alarms to be random here. I told the supervisor I'd take a field kit and head toward 14th Street. The line maps for the 456 and NQRW were burned into my head after years of chasing dead spots. If the repeaters were up, at least crews could coordinate. If they weren't, I could work miracles with a spare antenna and prayer. I threw my tool backpack over my shoulder, the one that always seemed heavier than it should have been, and grabbed a Pelican case with a portable repeater, the size of a lunchbox. I clipped my ID badge to my belt and slipped my handheld radio into its cradle on my chest. On impulse, I added the waterproof flashlight I kept for hurricane season, a roll of duct tape, and a pair of nitrile gloves. City habits. Time I hit the street, always be ready. Sirens were threading through traffic in both directions. NYPD cruisers, FDNY ambulances, OEM SUVs with blue lights pulsing behind their grills. People stood on the corners, staring down at their screens, holding them up like talismans, tracking the same thread. Words like infection and aggressor and unknown. I cut through Columbus Circle to the one line and went down the steps into cool air, thick with brake dust. The turnstiles were propped open for emergency access. The white emergency exit alarm will sound, doors hanging like open mouths. On the mezzanine, a transit bureau officer stood with two other cops talking to a station agent, their faces tight. I flashed my ID, NYC Transit, not a cop, but within the family. "We've got radio coverage issues around Union Square," I said. "I'm heading there. Stay off the platforms if they look bad," the officer told me. He was young enough that his gear looked too big for him. An NYPD patch over his heart, a service holster, a medical pouch. "They're telling us to pull people back to mezzanines if we can." "Copy," I said. "You got anything more specific than the alert?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "EMS says, people are getting bit." He made a face at the word as if it tasted wrong. "They don't stop, you get it? They don't stop. If you see someone acting strange, don't let them get near you." My mouth went dry. "Thanks," I said, and made sure my flashlight was where I could draw it quickly. I pulled my half-mask respirator from my pack and kept it around my neck. Not because I knew what we were dealing with, but because I'd learned years ago that the one piece of PPE you didn't wear was the one you wished you had. The downtown local platform was crowded but weirdly silent. A hush that felt like a library after the alarm has been tested. People clutched their bags and looked down the tunnel where a train's headlight brightened and dimmed as it idled. The conductor's window was open and the man's voice cracked as he called to passengers. "We're being held. Please do not attempt to exit onto the tracks." A woman screamed 2 cars down. Screams in New York are common enough that they slom through your awareness unless they break the pattern. This one did. It sounded like metal torn by hands. The crowd surged and then recoiled, a ripple in reverse, people moving away from the source but pinned by their own bodies. I swallowed hard, slung the Pelican case tighter, and threaded toward the staircase to the mezzanine. "Keep moving. Keep your head." The mezzanine was worse. A cluster of people crowded the emergency exit door. Someone had smashed the alarm box and the door wouldn't latch anymore. Beyond it, in the stairwell to the street, a man moved with a stiff, inaccurate stride, both arms reaching as if to touch and steady himself. His face and shirt were smeared with something. I refused to identify. A transit cop shouted for everyone to back up. The man on the stairs turned his head with unnatural slowness, gazed past the cop like he was looking through him, and kept coming. The cop shifted his weight like a person with too little space to act. In that second, something behind me moved, a series of impacts like a herd banging into a fence, and the crowd became a collapsing accordion. I didn't see how the scuffle ended. A maintenance worker yanked me toward the service corridor, and I led him. "CC, you sent you?" he asked over his shoulder. He was older, built like a short stack of cinder blocks, wearing an orange vest and a hard hat with stickers from every tunnel on it. "RCC," I said. "You got a name?" "Parker," he said. "Third rail's cut on the downtown side. We got a train pinned there and no path to evacuate." His breathing rasped. He'd been pulling people for a while. "If the radio holds, we'll keep them moving car to car. If it dies, we're shouting into a tin can. I've got a handheld down the corridor. It'll punch through the noise." We pushed into the long back hallway behind the switchboards where old tile gave way to bare concrete. We could hear the muffled thunder of feet upstairs. Farther down, I saw the green glow of an equipment room. I opened my case and started setting the repeater on a shelf, hands moving without my brain having to direct them. "Antenna power test tone." The handheld on my vest squawked. "Control. This is Union Square Conductor 477. Situations deteriorating on the platform. We can't hold doors." Parker toggled his lapel mic. "This is maintenance at Union Square Auxiliary. I have a tech with a portable repeater. We're going to try to get you longer reach. Anyone in there with medical?" A woman's voice cut in. "I'm a nurse. Name's Aaron, NYU Langan. I'm in the last car with a patient who's unresponsive but breathing." Her words were clipped. "Efficient. We need an evacuation route. The platform's not safe. Stay with your group," Parker said. "Text making your radio do magic." I lifted the antenna toward the corridor, angled the repeater to use the door as a passive reflector, and watched the bars on the signal meter climb. "Try again," I said. "Aaron, can you hear maintenance?" Parker asked. "Loud and clear," she said immediately, and someone near her actually cheered. "We built small order inside the big disorder. The repeater gave them a way to speak. The transit cop on the mezzanine bullied a path to an emergency staircase that came up a block away. The conductor moved people from car to car in short, controlled bursts. A few times, the radio carried sounds I didn't want to pass. Scuffling, choked sobs, a shouted warning, and then the slap of a door. But the plan held long enough to get people off that train. When it was over, the mezzanine had emptied. The platform abandoned, except for objects dropped it in the rush. A sandal, a folded stroller, a novel bent back on itself. Parker peeled off his helmet and stood there with it in his hands, staring at the empty cars that still smelled like arcing dust and fear. "I've never seen that," he said. "Never seen anything like that." "Me neither," I said. The repeater hummed benignly at my hip. The building shook with a deeper sound as a convoy of emergency vehicles went past overhead. My phone vibrated with a call. The name on the screen made my chest ache. Laya, my sister, who worked as a music teacher at a public school in Washington Heights. Danny, her voice was too bright, like a person performing calm. "I'm still at the school we were supposed to shelter, but parents, some are trying to get kids. I don't think the subways are moving." "They're not," I said gently. "Stay with your team. Lock the doors. You'll be okay." "Come up if you can," she said, and I heard her swallow. When it's safe." "I will," I lied without meaning to. "I'll call you when I'm headed uptown." Miguel checked in again, his voice loud over the channel as if he had a crowd pressed to him. "RCC, I'm at Grand Central. Madison Concourse is chaos. Security is pulling the door shut. The Metro North boards just went blank." "Get to daylight," I told him. "Find a spot with distance. We're on for mutual aid if we can get a bubble." I stepped into the street on the 14th and felt like I'd slept for a month. The sun seemed too bright, too ordinary. People moved in tense, compact knots. A helicopter beat the air toward the river. Across the avenue, a man in a suit walked straight into the slow-backing bumper of a delivery truck, did not react, and kept going until a passerby hooked a hand in his sleeve and steered him, shook his head once and kept moving. The next hours were full of sharp edges. The city tried to throw nets over the water. Bridges restricted, ferries paused, tunnels closed to traffic. OEM pushed an incident command post near the Manhattan Bridge, then shifted again as crowds overflowed the barricades. The EAS tone sounded on every car radio and television in every bar that still had the power on. Shelter in place. Do not travel unless directed. It sounded like a line from a manual because it was one. The manual never met a city like that. I made it back to the rail control center at mid-afternoon. In the elevator, I watched my face in the mirrored panel and saw how my expression didn't match what I felt. Inside the RCC, everything looked as it had, except the voices were a little louder, the shoulders a little higher. On one of the screens, the entire IND and trunk turned grey as dispatch marked the network out of service. On another, the bus control system flared red as drivers were told to pull over, lock doors, and wait for instructions. I found the empty chair next to Miguel and sat so hard my knees bounced. "They're calling it a neurological agent now," he said under his breath. "Then they're not calling it anything. OEM wants us to limit radio to operational traffic. Half the handhelds in the field are dying because people forgot to charge spares before this started." "How are you?" I asked, and he admitted with a roll of his head that he didn't know. We worked until early evening doing the new math of which lines could be used as evacuation corridors and which stations were just better caves than others. Around 7:30, someone started a rumor that a corridor at Times Square had been cleared. People began migrating toward it from 6 directions, and within 20 minutes the rumor had come true. By sheer force of bodies, someone else started another rumor that ferries would resume at Pier 11, and the ribbon of people along South Street filled until the river itself looked crowded. The next call I took was from a transit lieutenant in Queens. "Voice sandpapered by a long day. We've got a cluster up around 74th Street, Jackson Heights, Roosevelt Avenue. Rumors say the 7 is running. It's not. People are pushing down stairways. We need crowd control or we're going to have injuries because of the crash. I need buses. I need a dozen officers." I looked over the bus control board. "There's a depot staging in Woodside," I said, aware of how weak that sounded. "But they're not sending buses into a station where we can't secure the platforms." "Copy," he said in a tone that said he'd known that before he asked. Then he softened. "If you got a tech who can talk to us from the mezzanine, we'll take it." I thought of Leia north of there, of Elmhurst Hospital, just south of Miguel's mother who lived 2 blocks from 82nd Street. "I'll go," I said, before the part of me that was tired could object. "You need backup," Miguel said, already standing. "We stick together." We took a transit SUV east on 34th and up the FDR, which was moving like a river in flood. Slow, ready stretches of stopped traffic, then sudden surges. The driver, Pa, a no-nonsense supervisor whose badge had the ironed rims of years of uniform, used the shoulder when she could and let the light bar clear spaces when she had to. We crossed at 59th Street on the lower level of the Queensboro Bridge and saw what the bike path looked like when it carried the world. A slow, grim procession of people walking east with backpacks and animals and carriers. An entire city turned into pedestrians at once. We turned off near Jackson Avenue and threaded to 74th Street through a series of side roads only a bus operator would know. The Roosevelt Avenue Transit Complex is an entire ecosystem. The eels shuttering overhead, subway tunnels beneath, and a knot of commercial streets around it that have a heartbeat of their own. Tonight, that heartbeat strung across the main entrance. Officers stood with batons out, not to use but to suggest firmness, and they were losing the argument. We tucked the SUV against a curb, and Bilar started moving the minute her door was open. I found the Transit Bureau lieutenant at the top of the stairwell. He wore his radio cord under his epaulette and a look that said he understood the consequences of using the stern voice on a frightened crowd. He'd set up a triangle with 2 supervisors trying to shape people into a line. The public announcement system was a monotone, telling everyone what they could see. "No trains, platforms closed, please remain at street level." "Vega radio tech," I said. "I can patch your handheld into a portable speaker if you want more reach." He nodded once. "Do it." I found an outlet by a shuttered coffee kiosk and spooled out a length of cable to the little amp. The minute his voice jumped in volume and clarity, the crowd changed shape, tension easing as people could hear the same message at once. He explained the 7 was not running, the mezzanine was closed. The station agent would come up when it was safe with MetroArd refund info. You have to disperse to the street. If you need medical, Elmhurst is operating a triage tent at Broadway and 78th. If you live east, go east. If you need shelter, city schools will open as shelters. I'm going to repeat that twice, and then we're going to help you go. He said it, then he said it again slower. And people listened because an authoritative, calm voice with a plan can do more in 30 seconds than a siren can in 10 minutes. We let them go, not all at once, but in waves, asking families to take the lead, then the elderly, then everyone else. When a young man tried to push forward, a grandmother put a hand on his arm and shook her head. He backed up, ashamed. I've never been so proud and so afraid of a crowd. We'd nearly cleared the main staircase when the ambient noise shifted. It was subtle, the difference between a busy room and an alarmed one. I heard it as a narrowing in the mid-range, then a sudden rise in treble. Sharper voices, not angrier, but more urgent. The officers at the entrance turned as one, like dancers who hear the beat change. A shape was coming down Roosevelt with the wrong cadence, a slice in the flow. A man stumbled between cars and then straightened in a way that looked forced, like a puppet string pulled too hard. He had no bag, no phone. He came on and people peeled away to either side without anyone telling them to. The lieutenant didn't wait to see if he was going to stop. He extended his arm and without touching, created a new air barrier. "Sir, please hold." The man didn't. He walked through the space, head caned, eyes unfocused, shoulders forward. The officer's partner stepped in, a narrower presence that made the space thicker. The man stopped with a jolt like he'd bumped glass. He opened his mouth as if to speak, and nothing came out. And then another person with the same stride slipped along the curb, and another. The crowd made a sound like fabric tearing. Pa was suddenly at my shoulder. "We're done," she said softly. We're clear enough." Miguel and I packed the cable fast. We shouldered our gear and moved with Pav, not running, not drawing attention. Behind us, the lieutenant raised his voice and the speaker, and the crowd obeyed it like it was a rope to grab, flowing away from the station mouth. We detoured south. The streets in Jackson Heights smelled like cumin and exhaust. We passed Elmhurst Hospital and saw the tent they'd set up, lit by work lights, staffed by people who moved with practiced urgency. I saw a resident in blue scrubs look at a patient and shake her head once, only once, and then move on. I wanted to stop to see, something or tape something in place, but there were so many somethings I would have dropped one or all of them. At 82nd Street, Miguel asked to swing past his mother's building. On the second floor, his mum opened the door and cried because her son was there. And then she told him to go because her apartment was full of neighbors and she didn't want to be one more person to worry about. She pressed 2 bottles of water into my hands like I had done her a favor and told me to call her if we saw Weiler. We promised we would. It wasn't a promise we could keep. It was one we had to make. By the time the sky grew dark, we were back in the SUV routing via Northern Boulevard toward Atoria. Pa had the idea to reach the river. If ferries started again, even in fits and starts, the piers would turn into lifelines. I called Leia. My call went straight to voicemail. I left her words I hoped would work, even if she only heard them later. Bridge at 181st may be closed. Stay inside. If the school opens as a shelter, help register people. You're good at lists. I love you. We parked near Atoria Park. Lights off. The RF noise was lighter by the water. I clipped my handheld to higher gain and got into a ham repeater out on Long Island. "This is K2, Dan," I said, my call sign feeling suddenly like a hand extended. "Is anyone coordinating local traffic?" "Copy K2, Dan." A clear voice came back. "This is K2 MNY in Bayside performing a check-in net for medical and supply relays. What's your status?" "Transit tech with me." I said we have a portable VHF, UHF repeater, batteries, and basic medical. We can set up a relay if needed. He took that in stride like you do when improvisation becomes your operating mode. "We're logging shelters. You near a school?" I looked at Pa and she nodded. "PS 122 is 4 blocks, she said. "We're setting up there. I told K2 MNY, we'll try to get a basic comms table going. CC copy, he said. We'll route any locals your way. The walk to the school felt like a pilgrimage. People were assembling from every direction with bags and straw. Leah's eyes flicking up and down the street as if measuring distance to sanctuary. The principal was outside with a clipboard doing a triage that looked like every first day of school, and none of them. Gym's open, she told us matter-of-factly. CS if you're early. After that, floor space. We've got bottled water and dry snacks. Bathroom lines go down the hall on the left. Pa flashed her transit ID. We're setting up a communications table, she said. We can monitor city channels and relay information. The principal looked like she might cry, and then did not. You can take the stage, she said. There's a power strip near the curtain. Microphone works. The password for the Wi-Fi is taped under the desk. She went on to the next family and the next. We put the repeater on a folding chair, ran a cable, and brought the handheld traffic into a small speaker aimed at the stage face. I tuned to the OEM channel and listened as they established a borough-level incident command structure, staging, transport, medical, public information. It was the language we'd borrowed from wildfires and hurricanes and grafted onto a place that usually needed evacuation routes for parades, not pandemics. Aaron, the nurse from the Union Square train, found us by the water cooler, wearing a borrowed sweater and a calm expression that cost her something. She told me the conductor had gotten her group out of service passage and that she'd stayed to help in the triage tent until they discharged what they could and stabilized what they could not. I can take vitals, she said. I have gloves and a forehead thermometer and a bag of supplies. I charmed off a responder who was overstocked. She smiled with one corner of her mouth. I'm better with lists than public speaking. You're in luck, I said. We need both. We ran the school like a radio station and a clinic with more heart than equipment. People came with news and left with instructions which bridges were restricted, witches had opened under police supervision for prescription refills, where to bring a pet if the shelter wouldn't take them. A retired NYPD sergeant named Orr posted himself by the door with his rolled parade baton and his steady voice, and what might have become an argument became a cue because he made it so. By midnight, the lines on our paper map were tilting. We heard from a ferry operator that they were going to attempt a controlled restart on the East River routes at dawn. Limited capacity, masks required, no cash accepted. We heard from a parks officer that a staging area at Randall's Island was growing into a field hospital by the hour. We heard from a Con Edison supervisor that they were cutting power to segments of Midtown to reduce load as office towers emptied. We heard from an EMS captain that crews were running double calls, one for the person injured in the rush and one for the person who had become inexplicably aggressive and would not respond to sedation. He said it like a man reading numbers on a meter. He didn't say the other part, that sedation didn't work the way it should have. I sat on the stage edge with my boots swinging and watched the room. Families made nests with blankets. A guy in a Mets' hoodie started a soft-voiced story time for the kids. Pa hovered near the door and adjusted the flow with small gestures. Miguel checked and rechecked our battery stack like a person counting coins that had to last through a long winter. Laia didn't answer her phone. Somewhere near 200 a.m., a woman named Priya sat down next to me. She was a public information officer for NYC Emergency Management, and her eyes looked like they'd been awake for 2 days straight. We're pushing out the same core message because we don't have a better one yet, she said. Shelter where you are, avoid close. See contact. If you are sick, isolate. If you need medical care, call 911 and wait. She looked at our little rig with the handheld repeater and the thrift store speaker and smiled, tiredly. This is better than what I have at our post, she said. Don't tell anyone. What are you calling it? I asked, meaning the thing we weren't calling anything yet. Priya pressed her fingers to her forehead. clinically acute behavioral deterioration with aggression and loss of pain response. She let out a tiny laugh at the phrase. I know, we're testing everything. Environmental exposure, toxin, pathogen. There's talk about illegal labs on the waterfront, but there's talk about a lot of things when people are scared. Do we know if it's airborne? She shook her head. Unclear. The pattern isn't right for aerosol spread, but patterns lie on day one. She shifted. Your transit, you'll understand this. The models say we need to reduce movement to slow this, but the city is built for movement. We told people to stay and they're going anyway because staying means being alone with what they saw. And then we wonder why the models aren't working. She closed her notebook with a small thump and stood. Tell your people to keep their distance if they see anyone moving with that cadence. It's the first sign. We don't have a name. I said we don't. She agreed and went back into the air, made warmer by sleeping bodies. The second day began with river light in the high gym windows and the smell of coffee someone had conjured from nowhere. The city outside felt a snowstorm when the usual routes are both unfamiliar and too familiar. I took an hour with Miguel and Pa to sketch what we might need if the school stayed open longer than a day. A way to charge devices without plugging into the wall. A way to filter rumors without becoming a rumor. A way to mark time. We sent a runner to a hardware store on Broadway, and he returned with 2 folding solar panels and a roll of bright tape. We put the panels on the south-facing windowsill like lizards in sunlight, and taped out paths on the gym floor to reduce the nodding that happens when 100 people all want coffee at once. Aaron and a retired EMT named Jules set up a triage table and started asking gentle questions in quiet voices. The room settled into a rhythm. Children playing, adults negotiating, radios being checked, lists made and redrawn. By noon, the incident command channel said that the restriction on bridge traffic was tightening. Only emergency vehicles, the dispatcher repeated. No personal cars will be allowed onto the bridges. Do not attempt to cross on foot unless directed. The last clause carried the weight of a plea. People still went. We saw it out the window, the slow ant lines along the Queensborough and Triber, head down foot after foot, each person making the calculation that motion equals agency. I left the school after lunch for the first time in a day because not moving felt like admitting we lived in the gym forever. I told Pa I was going to Washington Heights. She didn't try to stop me. She looked at my pack, at my radio, at the set of my shoulders, and nodded like a person co-signing, a loan you both know has interesting terms. If you see a brown Honda with a cracked headlight on the left, she said, don't drive it, that's mine, I left it by Steinway. Her mouth twitched. I'm not going anywhere. Miguel insisted on coming. Aaron surpre iced me by standing up as well. You might need someone who can say the word breathe in a voice that makes people do it, she said. We took the simplest path we could think of, west to the ferry, river up to 96 or 1/10 if they would let us, then a bus or a long walk north. The East River Ferry had posted a paper sign announcing limited service, masked, spaced, quiet boarding. The line looked long and then less long as volunteers with vests moved up and down, reminding people of the rules. The ferry departed half full because they said so, and people didn't complain, because the boat moved through water that had no traffic under bridges that had too much. We disembarked near East 90th and cut west across a city with its hair flattened. Storefronts were closed with hand-lettered signs that might have been hopeful or not, depending on how you read handwriting. A guy with a cart was giving away bottled water with no explanation. A young woman stood in the doorway of a pharmacy and spoke to a crowd politely but in a voice that suggested there would be order. If you have an active prescription, we can fill a 30-day supply. If you need insulin, please have your card ready. We will not argue about co-pays. We reached Fifth Avenue and slid north along the park. I kept my eye on anyone who moved like their knees were locked. We gave a wide berth to a man who stood in the sunshine with his head tilted too far back, like the light was pouring into his eyes and filling him with something he couldn't contain. At 110th, we passed a school where the playground had become a staging area for deliveries. Cases of water, boxes of non-pea perishables. Volunteers sorted with the speed and accuracy of people who've done a food drive every holiday for 10 years, and then discovered this was the final exam. I called Leia again, near 125th. This time she answered with a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it since yesterday. "Danny," she said, and then didn't say anything else for a moment because words were scarce where she was. "Are you safe?" I asked. She said, "Where are you?" Some parents made it. School. Some couldn't. We kept the kids in the auditorium last night with a projector playing movies. We've got snacks. We're doing a schedule." She laughed softly. "You told me to make a list. I made 10. "I'm a few miles south," I said. "We're coming. We've got a nurse." "Do not take Broadway," she said, voice sharpening. "We saw something last night. People moving fast and wrong, like they'd forgotten how many joints are in a leg. They moved toward the sound of a car alarm, like they were listening to a song. We turned the alarm off and they just stopped like someone hit pause. We'll stay quiet," I promised. "Who's with you?" Mr. Kaplan from the history department, a custodian named Joe, 2 parents who wouldn't leave without their kids. "The kids." She drew in a breath that shook. "Danny, the kids are being better than the adults. They often are," I said, and pushed on with my legs that suddenly felt like they'd borrowed weight from my shoulders. At 145th Street, we cut west toward the river to keep distance from the main artery. Count Basie lived on a corner in a mural watching us go. The footbridge at 151st was closed, but the gate wasn't locked. A parks officer sat in a folding chair with a radio and waved us past. "You headed north?" she asked. "Washington Heights," I said. "Stick to the park." She nodded toward the green, sloping down. "People are cutting through the gardens, pure ambush points." She said the phrase like she'd taken it out of a briefing package she would have preferred not to read. We moved like hikers who had learned new trail etiquette overnight. We gave space to anyone moving odd. We made ourselves quiet. We waved when we encountered a group of students from City College carrying 2 cases of water between them with a broom handle. We saw a Con Edison truck nose into a substation and then stop because there were people standing very still in the lot like lawn ornaments, heads tilted toward the hum of transformers. We saw an FDNY engine parked across an intersection with its lights off and a de facto checkpoint run by a lieutenant with clipped white hair who had seen enough Manhattan to know which words to use with strangers. "Where are you going?" he asked. We told him. He studied us for a beat. "You move like you know how to move," he said finally. "Keep doing that." We reached the school mid-afternoon. The sight of Leia in the doorway knocked a breath out of me. Not because she was hurt, but because she was still there, living, breathing, putting her hands on the shoulders of kids and making them do as she asked with the gravity only a teacher has. She saw me, and for a second, we were 8 and 12 again, and making forts in our aunt's living room. Then she put her hands on my face hard and looked in my eyes to make sure the person she saw was the person she knew. "You're here," she said, and then looked at Aaron and Miguel as if we were a package deal. "You brought a nurse." "Of course you did. We got her troops' version of events in the language of survival. What they had, what they needed, what they could trade. They had water thanks to a parent who ran a deli around the corner, and had rolled metal racks into the hallway before he shut the door. They had a first aid cabinet restocked by a school nurse who showed up at dawn with supplies and authority. They had frightened children who had done what frightened children always do when a teacher organizes them, sat cross-legged, raised their hands to ask to use the bathroom, colored given pages with unknown colors. They needed communication and a way to shape the reality outside the school into something they could plan around. "We tried calling 311, Mr. Kaplan said. We got a recording advising us to shelter." Little repeater on the dais in the auditorium, plugged it into a wall that hummed with a power supply that might last for days and might not, and brought the OEM channels to a volume that was authoritative but not frightening. We kept it to the sideband for operational updates and used our own voices for the room. Aaron set up a small table by the door with a sign. "Feeling bad? Come talk," written in marker and bordered by a child's drawing of a smiling sun. The custodian, Joe, handed me a ring of keys I didn't ask to look at too closely. "If you open a door, close it," she said flatly. "If you close it, lock it. If you must unlock something, I'm not standing by. Tell me first." In the early evening, as the sun painted stripes across desks and posters about fractions, we heard a rumor that buses would be dispatched up Broadway to collect groups of people from shelters and take them south to the ferry. The rumor had specifics, which is how dumb ideas dress up as smart ones: routes, numbers of buses, departure times. Priya had taught me the night before what to do with rumors with specifics. You test 2 of the specifics. We got an emergency manager on the line who said, without pausing to consult anything, that no, there were no buses going up Broadway. The buses that were moving were working hospital transport in Brooklyn, and anyone telling you otherwise was either misinformed or malicious. "Please tell the kids a joke," she said quickly, and then moved on to the next call. At dusk, a sound rose on Broadway like a choir starting from half a block away. A car alarm, and then another, and then every alarm in a 2B block radius, singing at once. It was absurd. And then it wasn't, because almost on cue, people began to appear from shadows, moving with that wrong cadence, converging on the noise. They moved around the cars and put their faces close to the windows, and then stepped back as if perplexed, then leaned in again. It was the oddest ritual I've ever seen. It looked like what happens when you dangle a toy in front of a cat and it can't quite remember what pouncing is. We killed our interior lights. We listened to the car alarm syncopate until someone found the master cutoff and silenced the whole block. The figures outside slowed like dying gyroscopes, then drifted. Aaron exhaled audibly. Leia sat with the kids and told a story in a voice like a blanket. I found Miguel by the door. "We can't stay forever," he said. "We're going to run out of verbs." "Yeah," I said. "We slept in shifts, which is to say we dozed in triangles. One person at the door, one on the stage, one in the aisle." I woke to Leia sitting on the edge of the stage reading a picture book by the light of a phone with the brightness low. She looked up and made a face that said she was both fine and not fine in equal measure. I let Aaron take my place and went to the door where Jo sat with her chin on her chest and her eyes open. The third day, the city began to pick a lane. There were distribution sites with hours posted. There were neighborhood command posts with volunteers wearing paper badges. There were lists of people, lists of supplies, lists of rooms that could be used for sleeping and which had to remain classrooms no matter what, because even the softest chaos needs a core of normal. We heard that one of the big hospitals in Midtown had closed its ED to new walk-ins and redirected to a field hospital on the West Side Highway. We heard that the tunnel and the mayor say words that were meant to bind us to solutions and not to fear. By late afternoon, Priya radioed in with a request that sounded like a comms problem, but was really a hope problem. "We need a relay," she said. OME's satellite truck can't get a clean line from Washington Heights to the EOC. Too many obstructions, too many dead spots. What are you pushing? I asked. A neighborhood update with actual useful information in it, she said. I'm done with generalities. They need directions. I want to tell them where to go for meds, for family support, for pet care, for faith services. I need that to go out on something better than word of mouth. I looked at our stack of gear and then at the windows of the school that looked out over rooftops to the George Washington Bridge and thought of antennas. If we can get elevation, we can hit a repeater in the Bronx or along the Palisades, I said. Give me 30 minutes. Roger, Priya said. And for a second, the world shrank back to two people moving a small object over a chessboard. We didn't have a proper mast. We had a broom handle and duct tape and two aluminum tent poles Aaron's patient's parent had left in the hallway by mistake. We had a small directional antenna in my kit that I'd built because I get bored on snow days. We had access to the roof because Joe had keys and because Joe trusted me more than I deserved. We taped and tied, ran line around a vent pipe, and braced our contraption against a brick lip with sandbags the custodian produced from nowhere. Miguel tuned the handheld until it sang. We got K2MNY on frequency and asked him to listen to a test tone. You're weak but readable, he said. Give me 10 more degrees left. Miguel rotated the antenna a hair, the city unfolding in our peripheral vision, the bridge like a spine, the river like a muscle, the park like a lung. There you're good, K2MN said. And we let the line go and tightened the tape and said a little prayer to the God of good connections. Priya came up to the roof with her mic and her notes and a look that said she had gotten used to speaking to cameras and would now learn to speak to a city through a signal bouncing off a piece of aluminum weed zip-tied to a broomstick. She spoke slowly and clearly, using words I recognized from the plain language section of the public information manual and from her own sense of what works with human beings. If you need medication, go to the clinic at 175th and Broadway between 10:12 a.m. and 6:00 p.m. Bring your bottle or your prescription number. If you need to locate a family member, go to the Family Assistance Desk at the Armory on 168th Street. If you have pets, the shelter at 181st and Bennett is accepting animals with proof of ownership. If you need faith services, representatives from multiple traditions are gathering at 12:00 noon and 6:00 p.m. at the Community Center on St. Nicholas. She gave times, intersections, phone numbers. She told people what to do if they saw someone moving wrong, back away, seek a door, avoid loud noises, call for help if help is possible. The last part, the call for help, came out thick. She swallowed. She kept going. We kept the broadcast to 3 minutes and then repeated it. Between repeats, Priya drank water and looked at the river. Just looked. I trained for earthquakes, she said to no one in particular. I trained for storms. I trained for building collapses and fires. I never trained for this. We all are now, Aaron said, and touched the back of Priya's hand with the tip of one finger, as if to calibrate human contact without overloading it. The message got out. We heard it echoed back on frequencies we hadn't meant to reach, repeated by a parks worker on a handheld to a cluster of people waiting in line, recited, Baisi, a woman on a stoop with her arm slung over the shoulder of a neighbor. We saw a group of kids walking their dogs toward Bennett because that's what the minute of symmetry in a day that had so little. That night, I stepped outside the school alone. Washington Heights smelled like dinners have started and left to cool. On the corner, a bodega window glowed with a battery lantern and a handwritten sign, Need baby formula, can trade rice. The street was quiet enough that the sound of my boots on concrete felt like a story being told. I could see the bridge off to my left. On its upper level, the lights made a path that looked like the world before. Steady, no surprises. On the lower level, shadows move the wrong way. I looked at the spans and thought, if it began in New York, it will end everywhere, but this is my square foot of it. I did not become a hero. I became a person who said things into a microphone and charged radios and lifted heavy objects and counted batteries like they were days left on a calendar. I helped make a space where children could sleep and their parents could sit without thinking of every door as a threat. I walked to the river with Miguel and we stuck our hands in the water because we could, and we laughed because the river felt exactly like it always had. In the days that followed, we built habits that made us a little less fragile. We taped paper arrows to walls, and those became geography. We synced watches, and those became time. We made a list of names, and those became a neighborhood. We learned that the people who moved wrong were drawn to sudden noise and sudden light, and that sometimes the best thing to do was nothing at all. We learned that our biggest weapon was the boring discipline of doing the next thing on the list. On the 5th day, a transit dispatcher I knew from Midtown called me directly. "Vega," she said, "we're standing up a small corridor for supply trains. Diesel, no third rail. We're thinking Sunnyside to 125th. Don't tell me why it's a bad idea. Tell me what we need to not make it worse." "Clear platforms," I said. "Locked doors, people with radios at each entrance. Someone on the microphone whose voice they will believe." "Can that be you?" she asked. "I'll send someone better," I said, and handed the mic to Laya. She took it like a conductor taking a baton. "Attention, please," she said into the school's little PA, before we patched her to the broader system. "We're going to try something that requires your cooperation. If you are near an entrance to a station, please step away for 15 minutes. If you are inside, please come to the surface calmly. We need to clear a pathway for supplies. You can help. We know you can. We believe you will." She said it and then she said it again, and people did as she asked, because she made doing the right thing sound like the only option. The little train moved through at 3 m.m. a squat diesel with 2 cars of pallets. And my heart felt too big for my chest when it passed under our feet, because it meant that not everything was in reverse. Later, we would do it again faster, smarter. Later, we would reopen corridors to walk people from one shelter to another, to reunite families, to move nurses from where there were too many to where there were too few. Later, we would make rules and break them and make better ones. But that first time, it was enough just to see motion that wasn't escape. I called my mother in the Bronx that evening on a scratchy line that meant the repeater was working but not well. She told me about the neighbor who had brought her empanadas and the other neighbor who had a generator and shared an outlet so she could charge her flip phone. She told me not to do anything foolish and then told me she knew I already had. "You were always running toward the noise," she said. "Even when you were a kid and your cousin threw firecrackers in the alley." Weeks later, because days stretched out like string and the calendar on the wall began to look like a quilt, we would sit around a folding table and decide what we would call the first days when we talked about them. We chose not to give them the name of the thing that took people from us. We called them the days when the city forgot and then remembered how to be a city. We told each other that it all began in New York. And for us, that meant it began where we learned to share coffee, trade batteries, hang signs, say names into a microphone, and hear them in our separate rooms. We did not say out loud that it would end there too, because endings are less useful than middles when it comes to survival. I stood on the roof of the school one last time before we had to change locations because shelters rotate, because supplies move, because safety is a traveling show, and looked south. The skyline still had teeth. Lights flicked on in a pattern that surprised me with its obedience. The river ran. You could make out the buzz and click of insects and the distant thrum of a generator. Somewhere a radio played a song I knew from a summer when Laia and I were younger and everything was brand new. I thought about the man on the stairs at Union Square and the way he had moved wrong. About the car alarms that drew people like a magnet. About the voice of the lieutenant amplified through a battered speaker and how people did as he asked because he made a plan in a place where plans seemed impossible. It began in New York City with an alert tone on a phone with a train between stations with a nurse holding someone's hand. When we tell it, when we choose to, this is the version I want. Not the images of what we lost, not the catalogue of mistakes or fears, but the map of how we arranged ourselves around each other and made a shape that the dark could not easily enter. I am not brave, the way a movie wants a person to be. I am stubborn and careful and loud at the right moments. I am a tech who carries spare batteries like they're coins. I am a brother who followed a line on a paper map and then a line on a street and then a line of children into a gym. I am a man who will tell you that if you hold the microphone with both hands and keep your voice steady and repeat yourself without apology, people will do the next right thing. On the last night before we moved the shelter south toward the armory, a child asked me if the city was going to be okay. I told him the truth. "We're going to make it okay?" I said. "Not all at once, not every corner, but enough." He nodded, considering. Then he asked if he could push the button that carried our neighborhood update onto the air. I showed him how to press it once, not twice, and he did. And the light turned from red to green. And somewhere nearby a person heard their name for the first time in a day and knew where to go. If you're looking for a picture to put in a frame labeled the beginning, that's the one I'd choose. A kid's finger on a switch, a breath drawn before speaking, the quiet in the second before sound. And so that's how the first days went, the ones that began with sirens and caution tape and terms like shelter in place and turned into lists and routes and rooftop broadcast taped to broom handles. If you need it, I can draw you a map from Union Square to Washington Heights that stays inside the quiet streets and avoids the noises that call the wrong attention. I can mark where the coffee tastes best and who will give you a bottle of water with no questions asked. I can circle a gym where a teacher kept an auditorium full of kids, calm with a movie and a schedule, but mostly I'll tell you what I learned when I picked up a microphone in the place where it all began, that a city is not its lights or its trains or its bridges. A city is its verbs. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams.